Welcome to the Two Gurus Top Compliance Podcast with me, Kristy Grant-Hart. I'm here with the one and only Tom Fox, and thanks so much for sticking with us through our brief summer hiatus. This week, we're covering a shocking example of AI gone wrong and why AI governance is so important. The EU's pullback on due diligence rules, two huge conflict of interest stories, and Florida man's meth-induced stealing of a tourist train on his birthday. But first, Tom, how has your week been, and what do you think is the most interesting development?
Well, we're still, digging out and finding bodies in my home county. And so we're starting the more work and just trying to see what we can do to help people who are really in need and then deliver services that have been wiped out. So it's a terrible tragedy that is unfolded, and we're all trying to move forward.
Our hearts are all with Texas. Oh my. Okay. Well, where do you want to start today, Tom?
Well, I want to start with our good friend, or maybe your good friend, because you live in California, Elon Musk.
He relocated his companies to Texas. Are we clear? Go ahead.
Well, that was just his companies. That's not himself and his 13 children. But I suppose this was inevitable, given who he is and what he's doing with the company that was formerly called Twitter, now called X. But he unleashed a chatbot, a Grok chatbot, which is X's AI tool that engaged in antisemitic posts on X. And this was absolutely beyond the pale. And, we have some, I don't know, excuses or explanations were released by X, but it clearly shows they are not paying attention. And I still tell people it was Twitter that put me on the compliance map when I hung up my own shingle, because it really was a business platform back then. And you could communicate, you could sell, you could market yourself on Twitter. And obviously they've moved on beyond that and nothing ever stays the same. But I thought this was a real tipping point, because when you start having a bot praising Adolf Hitler on a public forum, that's a level or something that we've not seen from someone in this much in the mainstream. And it hopefully caused them to rethink what they're allowing their AI to do, or my fear would be it just portends more to come. But I just thought this one was so beyond the pale, and it was so destructive and so hurtful and intentionally done. And this one really stuck under my craw.
Well, okay, let's talk about some of the specifics. So about the Texas children, because of the nature of the Christian camp, he said the AI bot said they'd grow up to be little fascists. Some other things that it said were that it would be a good idea to move some of the folks essentially into concentration camps. So it was not a small thing that had happened. And I think that the distressing thing primarily for me, other than obviously the hate speech, was that the response was that we don't want our AI bot to go woke. So the guardrails have not been changed dramatically around it. And I think that one of the things that this can be a takeaway for compliance officers is just how important AI governance is, and imposing strong guardrails around what your chatbot or your machine learning AI agents, whatever they are going to be trained on and whatever they're allowed to say. Because I just extrapolated this to what if this were in the workplace and this chatbot or this, agent came up with this kind of language and been trained on the broader internet. I mean, the discrimination cases, the media reports on your company would be outrageous. And so for me, while this is from a public standpoint a truly terrible story, one of the reasons that we're covering it here is because compliance officers can see in real life examples just how bad it can get if they're not doing the AI training correctly and they don't have the correct guidelines. So let this be a lesson that it can get this bad, and it's not hard to get this bad, and we need to be caring very much about how we focus on AI and what we're teaching it so that we can control it to the best of our ability.
You said that much better than I ever could have. Thank you.
Well, we're going to continue with AI on our second story of the day, which is mine. It comes from the Wall Street Journal, and it's titled, Airbus Mistral Bosses Ask EU to Pause AI Rules. Well, that seems like a great idea given our last story. The subtopic of the article really says it all. It reads, quote, pressure is mounting to streamline and water down EU laws governing everything from carbon emissions reporting to data protection, unquote. Now, right now, we'll cover the EU AI Act request, but fear not, we'll cover the request to dilute the other EU laws later in this podcast. So this article deals with Airbus and other high-profile European companies sending a letter to the president of the European Commission asking her to delay the enforcement of the new AI rulebook. The new AI rulebook is set to come into force next month, and the companies are asking for a 2-year postponement of enforcement of key obligations. The companies state that the postponement is necessary because guidance that was due to come out last May has been delayed. I mean, they have a point. This means the companies are struggling to ensure that they have clarity on codes of practice for dealing with AI models like ChatGPT or indeed perhaps Gluck. The EU Commission has reassured companies that it will, quote, provide everything our member states and industry need to make the EU a true AI continent, unquote. All right, Tom, crystal ball time here on Two Gurus. Does the EU Commission pause the EU enforcement or does it press on?
I think it presses on because that seems to be the nature of the EU legislature, EU courts, and EU executives. However, we have seen them pull back in other areas, and perhaps they might consider it. I think it was in the triple C, DDD. I think I butchered that. Anyway,
Yes.
It was due diligence requirements. But I think that we have to have some leader on a world basis on AI. The U.S. has abrogated that completely. And I think the EU will see itself as setting the world standard. And just as they did with GDPR, they literally set the world standard. And I think there is some cachet to that. And I think there's a lot of importance to that.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that whether or not there are any singular obligations that are pushed down the road, I don't think that the whole of it or most of the key obligations are going to be. I think that they're looking at it. There's a lot of pieces of the regulation where it's about risk assessment. It's about not utilizing AI in ways that are really detrimental to society. And I think that companies can, within the constructs in the EU AI Act, make their own decisions about things like how ChatGPT is used within their company. So I agree with you. I don't think it'll be pushed, but it's interesting that it is a public push to stop it right now. And we will report, don't you worry, on what happens here at Two Gurus Talk Compliance. All right, Tom, where do you want to go next?
I'm going to continue with the horrible story route that I started with, because this one, as bad as I thought the first story was, I can't tell you how offended I was by the second story. We've linked to one article in the Financial Times, but there's been a series of articles, both in the Financial Times and now in the Wall Street Journal, about BCG, or Boston Consulting Group, taking on a project to model the resettlement and relocation of Palestinians out of Gaza and the cost to rebuild Gaza for some sort of commercial purposes. This is just beyond me. With all the stink that McKinsey had around South Africa or any of the other things they got in trouble with reputationally, Purdue Pharma or you name it, and for BCG to let this happen. If I could maybe explain some of the steps. Apparently, two partners took on a project that was looking at economic solutions around Gaza. And it was taken on as a pro bono project. And somehow it morphed into a $1 million consulting project to model the relocation costs of 50,000 Palestinians out of Gaza. I don't care what side of the fence you're on. There's nothing more sensitive in the world today, I don't think, than that topic. And if anybody is going to even think about that, they better not open their mouth and say it. And to take on this kind of consulting project with a well-known, well-established, reputable firm like BCG, you just have to wonder what happened. Well, if you listen to BCG management, the partners who took on the project brought it on as a pro bono project, and then didn't tell management that they were that had either had mission creep or scope creep, or it was a bigger project, and it had this entire relocation component. If you want to be less charitable to BCG management, they had $1 million contract. I got paid $1 million, and they darn well knew what the work they were doing was. So whatever the answer was, or whatever the true story is, you have to monitor work in high risk areas. And it simply because you're sitting in London or New York and doing work, if you're looking at a high risk area, that's potentially high risk work. And there have to be guardrails in place. There have to be internal controls. There has to be senior management oversight over anything high risk, because let's be charitable with BCG and said, well, these people just took on a little more work and a little more work and got paid more and got paid more. And it was really no harm, no foul. Well, yeah, there was a big harm and there was a big foul, but nobody was reviewing that from a policy perspective above them. We should certainly ask the question, where was compliance? We don't know the answer to that. As I said, the BCG's public stance is that the partners lied to whoever they had to report to on the senior management level, but still due diligence, ongoing due diligence and monitoring of risks in projects in high risk areas must be a part of whatever work you're doing. If you're an energy company sitting in Houston and you've got a project in Ghana, you have to monitor it almost continually now because simply it's a high risk area, and it's the same concept here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the details of this, and Tom, that article you sent was amazing and also 6 pages long. So that's, a lot of detail that's come out with the FT investigation. It is riddled with conflicts of interest as well. So there was favors being done from people in government. There was U.S. private security from people who were previously in the public domain. There were conflicts between the Israeli army and what they were doing in this project potentially, and problems with the policies for humanitarian aid. So there's all kinds of stuff going on in here. But I agree with you. The 2 things that really struck me were the numbers of conflicts and how they weren't being reviewed or managed, and also the due diligence and ongoing need. I think that this really shows how bad it can get. We talk about the potential for bad things to happen to firms, but this is one of those where it's gonna linger. It's gonna linger with them. And I think that it's a really good example of how bad it can possibly get, and what we need to be doing to maintain the reputations of our companies, but also understanding what it is they're doing and the cost benefit analysis of that type of work. So tricky stuff this week.
Kristy, when you lived in the United Kingdom, did you read the FT?
Yes, I did. I read the FT.
I want to shout out to the FT because they do incredible investigative reporting. They broke Wirecard. They broke 1MDB. Some great reporters there. I can't get it where I live now, but when I lived in Houston, I subscribed to it, but I just still have an e-subscription. So it's a great newspaper, and actually it's an excellent newspaper for a compliance professional because you hear about a lot of countries other than the United States.
I know. It's crazy. The Financial Times covers other things. Interesting story, Tom. I actually had a letter to the editor published in the FT. It was an article called People Commit Crimes, Companies Don't Commit Crimes, or one of the opposite. And I basically was like, no. Human beings are responsible for this. The company doesn't do something. The people in the company do things. And they thought it was smart enough to publish. So I feel very good about that.
You should.
All right. Well, my time in the UK and the EU has me always interested in what's going on over there. So let's go back to that. And we are going to extend the theme of people wanting to water down EU laws. So the compliance world has been talking for a long time about the 2 flagship European laws requiring a significant amount of due diligence, those being the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, or CSDDD, and the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, or CSDDD. Yes, this is difficult to keep straight. Back in February, the European Commission trotted out its proposed amendment known as the Omnibus. It was a proposal to significantly water down the CSRD and CSDDD requirements. So for anyone unfamiliar with how EU laws work, there are 3 bodies that need to agree on the final law. So the Commission's amendment proposal was the first shot at changing these laws. Now, In the past couple of weeks, the second EU body, known as the EU Parliament, released its own series of amendments, which are largely in line with the Commission's proposal to water everything down. But there's more. Let's hit the highlights or lowlights, whichever side you want to feel about that. If the Parliament's amendments were to pass, the only companies in the EU that would be in scope would be those with over 3,000 employees and more than 450 million euros net turnover. Now, for U.S. and non-European companies, the CSDDD applicability would depend solely on having net turnover in the EU of more than 450 million euros. And so the employee thresholds that were in the original law, so number of employees, will go away for EU, non-EU, and U.S. companies. Now, in good news for many smaller companies, the obligation to request and obtain information from those out-of-scope companies all the way in the value chain, that'll go way down because asking for that information or responding to those requests becomes voluntary. So, lastly, in the CSDDD, the obligation to adopt a climate transition plan is eliminated. What happens next? There continues to be a negotiation between the EU Commission, Parliament, and Council. Lawyers think the very earliest we will get the final answer is during the first half of 2026. So, Tom, the article I sent you was 10 or 12 pages long, written by Gibson Dunn, my old law firm, hooray Gibson. I barely scratched the surface, right, with all the changes suggested in the Parliament's proposals. I did think it was interesting just how much they matched what the Commission is trying to do. So what do you think of all of this watering down? Will it stick? Is it helpful to make the EU less of a highly regulated place? What's your opinion about all of this?
Now that you've given me the correct name of the law I was trying to talk about earlier, the CSDDD or CSDDD, I think a lot of compliance professionals in America are, I wouldn't say askance, but perhaps a little disappointed in this move by the EU. And I'm going to say the collective, we feel that there is a need for a strong due diligence on these issues. I certainly understand businesses pushing back, and I certainly understand all of those issues. I don't think it's going to get through.
You don't think that the changes are going to get through?
Oh, excuse me. You know, I got an allergy in New York City. How does that happen?
You're allergic to New York?
Okay. Yeah, I think the EU's going to hold tough, even with the Commission.
Ladies and gentlemen, the crystal balls continue. We will see whether Tom is right. I happen to think they're going to change it pretty dramatically, and I think it's in response to the perceived overregulation of EU. I think we'll probably get something in the middle. So I don't know that they're going to do things like totally eliminate the requirement for some climate planning, but we shall see, and we will let you know. Stay tuned. All right, let's go to one of our favorite topics, which is overworked people and what happens to them in their jobs. What do you want to talk about, Tom?
No, I want to talk about culture, and I want to talk about trust.
Okay.
And I want to talk about building relationships. And I want to talk about how you, as an employee, are the heart and soul of our organization. So much so that you're going to have to take a lie detector test every month to let me know if you've thought about any other jobs. This comes to us and from Bloomberg, and Matt Levine, one of the great business reporters or business columnists of the day, reported that, I think it's Goldman, has required Goldman will require quarterly loyalty updates. You might as well call it a loyalty oath from employees that they have not taken another job. So maybe you can somehow justify that because you want to know if people have already signed on with somebody else. Maybe. But I can quickly see this going to, have you thought about it? Have you interviewed? Do you have any friends anywhere else? I mean, the thought police could just go crazy with this. And if there is a way to show we don't trust you, I'm not quite sure there's a better way to do it. And this is aimed at new employees. This is right out of the box. We don't trust you. Oh, and by the way, you have to work. Well, we've cut it back to 80 hours a week, allegedly. no longer 100 a week, but we don't trust you. And I just think that's the most horrible message you could possibly send. Now, maybe at Goldman, they don't care. But I can see this quickly going down the lawyer's slippery slope to being required to disclose literally any contacts. And maybe even when you think about it, I don't know how you felt about it.
I thought it was fascinating, mostly because the hiring cycle, apparently, in private equity can be up to 2 years. And so they'll say yes to a job 2 years before they actually go to it. And apparently this is the merry-go-round, which I never heard of, but is sort of a fascinating idea that you already know what your next job is 2 years from now. But how does that affect culture if you're not actually committed to where you are because you already know you're leaving? That's in and of itself a fascinating idea. But I live in California, and I immediately thought about the California technology companies that had all these non-solicitation agreements where people couldn't take another job. And the California court said, And so the legislature, like, you can't do that. You can't stop people from taking other jobs. My understanding, though I am not a New York employment lawyer, is they have similar non-solicitation provisions. So I don't know. I just think this is going to be zapped down by the court within 30 seconds. But you're right. From a culture perspective, are you looking? Are you thinking? Do you want to leave? Isn't the question. The question is, are you happy here? Do you want to stay here? What can we do to make your job someplace you want to be? It's a very different question than are you even considering leaving? Because who wants to talk about that?
Well, and you bring up a great point, because if someone had been at Goldman 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, you've received some training of literally one of the best companies in the world. And so if there's an argument that by poaching our people, you're stealing essentially the intellectual property we've invested in these new people. But that's not the situation here. As you said, with this hiring cycle thing, they're swooping in and hiring people who haven't even started. I can see no legitimate business reason to do that, other than maybe Goldman's identified a smart person. But you ought to be able to do that yourself. So it's beyond my comprehension that they would try to block people who haven't even started working there through these loyalty tests.
I'm trying to ask my employees every quarter or every month if they're thinking about leaving the company. I mean, it's so like you keep hearing, you're cheating on me, you're cheating on me, you're cheating on me, and then you're like, well, yeah, I am. Then if you're gonna keep asking, maybe I shouldn't be here. I don't know. It's be an interesting one to see. Hopefully, this is not a trend.
So what's the Department of Justice Antitrust Division got for us, Kristy?
Well, Matt Kelly alerted me to this one. It is an exciting announcement. They finally have a whistleblower vignette program. So they finally jumped on the very well-worn bandwagon to hand out money to people who send tips that lead to successful prosecutions. So there's even a web page. I thought that was very cool to enter your tips. Now, the attraction, of course, is up to 30% of the fines imposed when a whistleblower gives them material information they didn't know. Now, an interesting switch up, the DOJ's Antitrust unit has partnered up with the famous law enforcement team of the U.S. Postal Service. That's correct. The U.S. Postal Service has investigators to investigate procurement fraud. And Tom, I knew that. You know why? There is a movie that's quite good called Queen Pins, based on a true story, where the U.S. Postal Inspector's enforcement arm brought the coupon-stealing women to justice, which is based on this true story. So, back to our story. Author and friend of the pod, Matt Kelly, reminds compliance officers to double down on antitrust training, as antitrust violations, frankly, I agree with this, aren't always intuitive, and so training is key. Okay, Tom, were you even aware that the Antitrust Division didn't have a whistleblower program? I mean, are they just that late to the party that we just assume it, or is this news?
Well, it was news to me, but I would actually point you to our good colleague, Michael Volkov, who actually worked in the Antitrust Division, except they're so arrogant, they call it the division. Yeah, I worked at the division. And so based upon that alone, perhaps not, but it's certainly a welcome introduction to the whistleblower program, and well needed as well. This administration, perhaps for reasons that we wouldn't agree with, has gone whole in on whistleblowers. So I think that's a good thing. even if perhaps their motives were not the ones we would have around whistleblowers and crowdsourcing of material information from your employees. Nevertheless, I think this will certainly help enforcement. And if we have more enforcement, we'll have more compliance, and hopefully things will move a little bit better down the road.
To be clear, I was not disparaging their choice to have one. It was just weird it took so long.
I got it.
All right, let's move on to a source I don't believe we have ever used for one of our article. Tom, what's going on in the football world?
Yeah, you can tell you're a football fan.
I mean,
okay.
Go Steelers. All right, go ahead.
Go Steelers. we cite the ESPN for the following story. The NFLPA, that's the National Football League Players Association, the head of that union is a gentleman named, I don't have his name. Anyway, he turns out is consulting for a private equity company that's trying to buy an NFL team. Now, a little known fact of my background is I have a degree in labor relations. And I used to be what was called a union guy. And the thought of the head of the union working directly with management would be antithetical to the views of union membership. And I believe the technical term would be conflict of interest. Now, the person that's the head of this NFLPA, he was formerly the CFO at Booz Allen when they had a massive FCPA enforcement action. So we have to assume that the NFLPA did due diligence, although there are some questions around that another ESPN article raised around the process, a due diligence process. But I just cannot imagine Jimmy Hoffa saying, yeah, I'm going to take this consulting contract with Roadway while I'm negotiating our new Teamsters contract. It's just beyond me here.
Okay. First of all, the assumption that they did due diligence makes me laugh. But all right. First of all, I'm so excited for expanding our. So I know you're a massive football fan, but I am as well. I'm just saying I'm so excited for August. We'll get into those pre-games. Okay. I think the thing that stood out to me more than anything in this conflict-ridden article was that it appears that this isn't investigative reporting. It appeared that all of this is known to them, right? These are disclosed conflicts. There was nothing in there that said it was being hidden. So it appears that none of them are being managed in a way that a compliance officer would handle them. I do wonder if this article is going to prompt an actual controversy. I mean, the person who is in charge of this union relationship is a part-time consulting person at this private equity group. And the end of the article said that no one who's ever had this role has ever done anything like this. They don't have outside employment. This gentleman is on the board of one of the companies owned by the private equity firm. So there are conflicts everywhere here, and every good conflict program would look at those board relationships and they'd look at these conflicts of interest. So I don't know if they just need a better compliance officer or if they don't have one. But by the way, if that's the compliance officer, call me. We can help. But it just it feels like this is our second very strong conflicts case today. And I don't know. We'll see what they do with it.
Rock on.
All righty. I did my terrible towel out, Tom. I'm telling you, hardcore. All right. My next article is from our friend and my mentor, Joe Murphy, in his Ideas and Answers newsletter. And it's titled Unfinished Business at the Department of Justice. So what is this unfinished business? Joe called it the perverse incentive. So you see, the DOJ frequently gives credit and leniency to companies that start up their bells and whistles compliance programs after the criminal activity has been committed. And what's worse is the DOJ, except in one instance that Joe could find, has not discussed or published cases where benefits were lathered onto the company because they had a good compliance program at the time of the offense. So Joe and his co-author, Jeff Kaplan, then propose this all too plausible scenario. So imagine a savvy general counsel reviews all of the cases and guidance. She can clearly see that her best way forward is to have either a bare bones program or none at all because it doesn't cost her anything. I mean, after all, if the company were investigated, she could just put in a great program then and impress the government, and she would have saved a lot of money, right? Up until they were investigated. So Joe finishes the article with a plea to the DOJ to make this right by publicizing when companies get declinations or positive outcomes for having a good compliance program at the time of the violation. And I'm sure they'll get right on that. Tom, what do you think of Joe's point here? His hypothetical story, it was very affecting in the way I think about this issue. What did you think?
So I think there's lots going on here. The first point I would say is he's absolutely right that there are no FCPA enforcement actions, NPAs, DPAs, where the company had a robust program at the time of the incident in question. That has happened when we've had declinations. And so that's where that sort of route or path leads. It leads to a declination. That's point one. Point two is the plea he makes for the Department of Justice to publicize more fully or more thoroughly declinations is the plea that every compliance commentator I know has made since declinations became a thing in the Morgan Stanley declination. I have made that plea. I made that plea directly to heads of the FCPA units. And sort of to a man and woman, their response has been the company doesn't always want to have their name out there with a declination in public with all the dirty facts. And so if the company won't sign off on it and it's a declination, maybe that's the reason. But we've never been able to get that. He's absolutely spot on for doing that or making that plea. As to the hypothetical, if you take the slippery slope long enough, I can see where you can get there. But if you take that approach, there are collateral consequences that will be beyond having to build out a compliance program and hope you get a declination out of that. You may set yourself up for a conscious indifference claim. If you're a general counsel or CCO or CEO that's reviewed the cases and made a decision that you have articulated, I think there could be a potential individual prosecution. The shareholder action for violation of Caremark would clearly occur because the board has a separate duty to oversee that there's a functioning, effective compliance program in place. And if there is none, then the board has liability. Now, that may be covered by D&O insurance, but that's another cost you're going to have. And then, of course, is the reputational damage that we've talked about in some of the other cases. But there's two other points I want to raise. If you make the decision not to have a minimum compliance program. Number one, and I saw this in the energy industry, the way they enforce compliance down the supply chain or even the customer chain was every contract you signed, your counterparty had to have a compliance program. And it was reviewed and checked to some extent by the person or the company signing your contract with. So you might not be able to get business or sell your product if you're trying to do that. Number two is if you want to access the money which is within your company through a stock sale, through a private equity acquisition, through a private equity loan, through a bank loan, and even getting insurance, you're going to have to show you have a functioning compliance program. So you may not be able to access the value of your company as collateral to get a loan or get money to grow your company. So there's collateral reasons to have some type of compliance program in place. So I don't think you're going to have someone make that decision, but he's right to point out it's certainly possible.
Joe, always the deep thinker, always somebody that we should be listening to. All right, Tom, let's move it back to Texas. What's going on there?
So here we have one of the most not unique, but as blatant a bid rigging scheme as I've seen in a long time. And Company A wanted to develop a new basketball arena and concert arena in Austin, which they did. It's now called Moody Coliseum. And the CEO of the company promised one of the bidders, or allegedly promised one of the bidders, we will do some other business with you. If you do not bid to build this, we'll give you some rights within the stadium or ticket rights or something along those lines. And the company accepted this was bid rigging. And the individual CEO has left the company and now being pursued individually and claiming he did nothing wrong. So as classic Texas two-step, it was clear to me that there was pertinent allegations of bid rigging to the point where the company paid several $1 million in fine, and the individual is going to fight it. And we'll see if the SEC or DOJ is actually going to prosecute.
Yeah. So the CEO's defense here I thought was interesting. He basically said these types of partner agreements are normal and they assist with competition. They make it better. So I'm stretching my mind to try and find a reason to believe he's right. Is there legitimate partnering in this way, promising another competitor that if they don't bid, that you'll get goodies on the other side? Is there legitimacy to that, Tom, anywhere?
I don't think so.
Can we move from Texas to Florida?
Thank God for Florida, man.
God for Florida, man. This one was actually brought to my attention by my darling friend, Mary Shirley. So thank you for that. By the way, anyone who has a great Florida man story, please email me at kgrant-hart@diligent.com, and I will thank you on air for it. Also, it helps me not wade through all the horrible murder stories when you Google Florida man. So let's turn to Florida man Jonathan Winslow, who wanted to celebrate his birthday in an unforgettable way, and boy, did he. Mr. Winslow had a special place in his heart for trains, specifically the Conch Tour train in Key West, which is actually more of a tram than a train, but I digress. So while high on meth, Mr. Winslow decided that nothing says party like hijacking a slow-moving open-air tram full of tourists. So how did he pull off this birthday bash? He pulled up in his Kia, left it running, and then told a confused employee that he used to work there. He then jumped into the train playing conductor and drove off. You got to get him credit for being committed to the job. He picked up 2 random passengers to keep the party going. And when the train route finished, his conducting days were over and he walked off. That was not the end of the story. Cops caught up with him and asked him about his railroad hijinks. He notified police that it was his birthday, and there's nothing like drugs and felonies to make your big day better. When cops found a meth pipe in his pocket, he said it was a weed pipe, so that's better. Winslow's current itinerary includes stops for burglary, grand theft auto, and possession of drug paraphernalia. No word on whether he's offering guided tours in the county jail. So happy birthday, Jonathan Winslow. Hopefully next year your birthday won't go quite so off the rails.
Well, I can only say that I hope it happened in July so I can say we're both cancer babies.
Okay. On that note, have a very happy birthday day, Jonathan Winslow. Thank you for joining us at the Two Gurus Talk Compliance. I'm Kristy Grant-Hart.
And I'm Tom Fox.
Compliance Podcast Network. Start your mornings with daily compliance news, quick, sharp updates on the top compliance and ethics stories in under 5 minutes every morning in Compliance Podcast Network. Because compliance never sleeps. Need practical advice fast? Check out Compliance Tip of the Day. One actionable idea to level up your program. Short and sweet, every day on Compliance Podcast Network. Got 10 minutes? We've got the week's top 10 stories. 10 for 10 brings you the big compliance headlines. Fast, fun, and focused. Every Saturday on Compliance Podcast Network. And don't miss the Sunday Book Review, where compliance meets culture through must-read books and big ideas every Sunday in Compliance Podcast Network. Whether you're in the office, on a walk, or commuting, stay smart, stay ethical, stay tuned. Only on the Compliance Podcast Network. Available wherever you listen to podcasts.